Welcome back, soapsters, and in today's tutorial we are looking at doing a splash swirl, but this particular splash swirl I've decided to do as kind of an underwater theme. And because the splash swirl looked a lot like kind of tendrils or kind of organic shapes to me, I thought, well, we're actually going to do it as a jellyfish. So what I'm doing here is I've just poured some soap into a crescent mould, in this long column mould here in pink, and what I'm just doing at the moment is carving out some grooves underneath it, so we get kind of like a wobbly line underneath. Now it's really simple. Now what I tend to do is I keep the soap in the mould so that I'm actually supporting that underside in the mould, and then using a ruler I'm just going to line that up where I want my groove to go, and using a carving tool. This is just a metal carving tool. You can pick these up quite cheaply on places like Amazon and stuff like that. I'm going to run it down the length of the soap. I'm just going to use the thin bit first, and I create those grooves. Now once all those grooves are created, I then move on to cutting it. Now my mould is about 6 inches long, so I'm going to cut these to roughly 6 inches, a little bit over, because you can always kind of shave a little bit off, but you can never add that soap back on again. So always cut a little bit wider than you think it's going to need to be. And I'm just going to bring in my other kind of jellyfish shape here, and I did two different colours, just using a standard pink mica from my favourite company Resonate in the UK. The lower one is the pink on its own, just mixed with some oil before I put it into the soap, and the top one is the same colour but just mixed with a little bit of Arctic white. Now I tend to use a white mica rather than titanium dioxide. I find that it goes through quicker and you don't get quite so many of the spotting. Now in the bag here I've got some fluorescent yellow mica, and I want to kind of create a mica line around these so that they kind of like glow a little bit within the sea. So this is just some like fluorescent yellow mica that I'm going to put in a bag, pop my embeds into that bag, and then just rub it all in. Now this is going to be quite a thick layer of mica, but because these embeds are actually going to be really inside the soap, there's going to be none of this is going to touch the outside wall of the soap, or it's going to be on top. I'm not quite so worried about how much I'm putting on, because I want this to really kind of show up. And the lighter the colour of mica, the more you have to use. So because these are going to go through, I'm not quite so worried about using this amount of mica on them. So I'm just going to pop them into there. I'm going to leave them in the bag until I'm ready to use them in the next stage of this soap pour. So we're on to the first stage of this pour. Now what I've done is I've got a little block of soap here that I'm just resting my mould on, that you can see underneath the mould on the left hand side there. Now I want the sand at the bottom of the sea for this bit, and so in order to make a really beautiful sand colour I use a gold mica. Now because when you use cold process soap and it becomes opaque once it has solidified, using gold creates this really beautiful sand colour. I've also added in there some coffee grinds. These are just coffee grinds from my coffee machine. Make the coffee. I then take the grinds out of the little kind of pot, pop them on a tray, and I dry them out. So these are fully dried coffee grinds. What I find is that actually once they've been dried out and there's no water left in them, they will last for quite a considerable amount of time. So if you do like a kind of grind, a bit of a scrub in your soap, I like coffee grinds. Now they are quite sharp, and you could go for something like a pumice stone or something like that if you wanted something less scratchy, but I kind of quite like that. So I'm just mixing this through, and I'm just using a little mini mixer because this is such a small amount of soap. I don't need a great big blender in there. I just need to kind of get it to saponify. And then I'm pouring that into the mould at an angle so we get a little bit of interest in the soap. You could do this in very flat layers, but I just wanted a little bit of interest in there. And what I did is I allowed that to set up, and then went back in and did some kind of manipulation of that soap to give it some interest. Now this is how I prepare my micas. I've got 4 colours here. I'm going to do the last 2. So this is the first colour for my kind of sea area. And you can see there that I used roughly 1 part mica to 3 parts oil when I'm mixing these up. Actually might have been 1 part mica to 2 parts oil. But anyway, you want to make it up beforehand so that all that mica gets a chance to disperse. And what you'll see here is I'm just kind of mixing that through, and I've got 4 colours that I want to use. I've got 2 blues, kind of a sea blue just off, and some green. I've got a fluorescent yellow and a fluorescent pink, which are going to be the tendrils of my my jellyfishes. So those are the 4 colours we're going to use within the soap batter that I'm going to make up in a second. So let's just get those all out of the way, and we'll move on to the next part. So once my base had set up and I've given it some texture, I now need to work out how much soap I need to use. Now I use a master batch solution of lye, which is a 1:1 ratio. So it's 1 part lye to 1 part water. So what I'm doing here is I'm working out that I want to use roughly 682.5 grams of batter. Now I know that's going to be the entire, so I've kind of taken a bit of a guess and thought, right, if I use 460 grams of oil, and I then look at my lye, which I need 63.4 grams of. Now I double that in order to get my master batch solution, which is 126.8 grams. And then I work out my water. Now my water is basically the amount of water that I would normally need for that amount, minus the 63.4 grams of lye, because my lye has already got 63.4 grams of water mixed into it because it's master batched, which means I then need 51.6 grams of water. And this is really important. It's really important to have a book or a notepad near you to do those sorts of calculations, just so that you can make sure you're doing everything right. So I've got my oil in my jug here, and this is just a master batch of oils that I've got, which I can then use my master batch solution into. And I'm going to pour my lye solution into here. And I'm just going to take a little bit of time here to show you the different stages that you go through when you are mixing up a batter. And it's quite important because for this particular design, I wanted to do a little bit of a gradient through the blues, and I also wanted to create this kind of like swirl of the pink and the yellow, and I needed to do it all in this one batch, and I needed enough time to be able to do all of those things in one foul swoop. So what I'm just doing here is I've popped the lye in, and I'm just giving it a little bit of a mix to kind of get the process started. But this solution at the moment is not emulsified. This is basically oil, water and lye, and it's not coming together, and it needs a little bit more agitation, which is either stirring it continually or kind of getting it to do it quicker. But as you can see here, hopefully you can see on the end of the blender, it's all starting to break apart. There's no coating on that blender that shows it started its process of saponification and emulsifying. So we're going to give this a very, very brief whiz with the stick blender, and notice how I'm bouncing up and down to get rid of the bubbles in the bottom of it. And I'm basically just going to whiz this now a little bit, and what I'm doing is giving it a whiz with the stick blender for maybe 2 or 3 seconds and then stirring. And then as you can see here, as I bring it up, and hopefully it will focus, but it's focused on the floor there we go. We're not quite there. It's still a little bit of separation. It was a little bit out of focus, and I do apologise on that one. So let's give it another little kind of quick bounce, get rid of some of that air, and then we'll give it another quick whiz, and you can see how that kind of oil on the top goes underneath, and we're getting a nicer, more homogenised batter here. So let's see if we can catch this and see whether it has actually come to a nice trace, and hopefully it will focus. And not quite, and I don't think that's quite there just yet, so we're going to give it one more little kind of whiz. We're going to bounce it, get rid of as much of those air bubbles in the bell of the blender, give it another quick whiz, and you can just see my finger there, it's pulsing it. I'm not holding it down, I'm not whizzing this to within an inch of its life. I still need this batter to be fluid, to be liquid, to give me say 15, 20, even 30 minutes of work time. So when it comes to being able to do these swirls, the batter is at the right consistency. Now here you can see how it's coating that blender, and if you look up the shaft, you'll see a little bit there where it's splitting. So I always use the bit that's splitting at the top here to understand whether I've got an emulsion, and if the two of them start to look the same, then I know I haven't got that emulsion, and that's really a nice benchmark and a nice reference point to make sure that you do actually have an emulsified batter. So that's a little trick there that I always use just to make sure that I've got my soap sorted and in the right place. So anyway, let's scrape some of this out of here, and this is my main batter for doing all of my C in a gradient pour. Now, this is technically a gradient and not an ombre, because an ombre would go from dark to light in the same colour, and a gradient can go from any colour to any other colour. So I'm going to start by pouring off some batter into 2 pots here, and these pots are for my fluorescent pink and my fluorescent yellow, which are going to become the tendrils, which is actually the major proportion of this splash swirl. And then I'm also going to pour off a tiny little bit into another container, which I'm going to keep uncoloured, and that's going to make up my kind of transition colour from a dark kind of greeny colour through into a light greeny colour, then up into a blue, and then up to the top of my C. So let's just move those out of the way, and we'll deal with those in a minute. And into my glass container here. Now this is a scientific beaker with a handle, so it is borosilicate glass. And whilst a lot of people think you can't use glass with soaping, they are designed for holding base and acid liquids. So what I'm going to do here is I've got a little container that I've just picked up, and I'm going to pour off a little bit of this, which is my transition colour from one to the other, just so I can get a lighter colour into a darker colour. And then what I'm going to do is pour off a little bit into my borosilicate jug here, and this is going to be coloured in my dark colour, and the rest is going to be coloured in my other colour. So then we're going to go with the blue on the bottom. Actually, we're going to go from a blue up into kind of like a turquoise sea. So I'm going to pour this one into here, and it will create a very dark colour, which is why I've pulled off a little bit in order to be able to add that back in at a later stage. So let's give this a little stir and see what kind of colour we've got. Look at that. So it's gone to a really nice kind of deep kind of aquary blue, turquoisey. I really like that colour. I'm very, very happy with that one. So we're going to get that all mixed into here and just scrape around the bottom so we've got all that. And again, notice how the batter here is still quite fluid. I know I've got to work with this for a little while. So I want it as fluid as possible, so by the time I get to doing my swirl, everything's thickened up enough to give me those beautiful striations. So into this main colour, we're going to go with the lighter green. Now I've done it this way round because I feel that I can lighten this blue up enough to then when the green starts to come in, we're going to get a fairly nice colour gradation through it. So moving on to our 2 accent colours, we've got our absolutely bright yellow here, and I use a fluorescent when using yellow, because if you don't use a fluorescent, I find that yellow becomes quite wishy-washy and it just doesn't work. And a fluorescent pink here, again, just because I want the contrast between the blues and the greens with the swirl. I've done this once before and I used kind of purples and oranges. It just didn't sit, it just didn't work, and it all became a muddy mess. So I've gone with a really nice bright fluorescent yellow here, which you can't see because I've got my hand in the way, and then I'm going with this nice fluorescent kind of pink here. And again, if you're mixing colours with a little mini whisk like this, go from light to dark, and then you don't have to clean the whisk off, and everybody is happy and you get these lovely colours. And I also don't mind if the yellow goes into the pink, you get that kind of like pinky orange coral colour. Fine with that one. So let's pop those off to the side, and let's give a little wipe down here. These colours always stain. I have a cover on my surface. This is not wood, this is just a cover, and I do quite like it. So here we've got our main bluey kind of green colour to go in, and as you can see in the mould there, I've actually textured the top of this. So when we cut through the bars, we're going to get a little bit more texture in it rather than just a dull, boring flat line. So zoomed in a little bit here for you, and we're going to make our first little pour. Now with a gradient pour, you pour an angle, so I've got this propped up on a couple of little bits of soap, and you then pour down one side of the mould and you allow that to filter across, and you always pour down the same side. So you can see I'm using that blank, that uncoloured batter to go into here to give myself a slightly lighter colour. And again, this is one of those things when you're thinking about gradients, think about the colours that you want flowing through. Do you want it to go from a colour to a colour? Do you want the colour to kind of get lighter and then darker into the next one? How do you want to work it? You can do this. That uncoloured batter could actually be a yellow. So we could be going from the blue into a really kind of bright yellow and then taking the other green into a green colour. So there's lots of ways that you can use that intermediate batter to create a beautiful gradient. But here we are just using uncoloured batter to lighten it up. So technically at the moment I am pouring what would be classified as an ombre. So I'm basically just lightening this colour from the deep dark blue that I had into a lighter blue, and then as soon as I start introducing the green colour, I'm then producing a gradient from that blue into the green. So this is a hybrid of pouring a gradient and pouring an ombre, starting with an ombre, moving into a gradient. So, but it's the same technique. It's just a matter of whether you want light to dark or colour to colour. It's very, very simple. So again, there we go. I've poured that next section and I've got a little bit of that light colour there. But I'm going to start, I think, with just bringing in some of this green, because again, I can use that white colour a little bit at the end to pull the green colour back up into a white or into a lighter green. And then when I do my top section, I can pour that lighter section with a lighter green. I'm still going to get a nice kind of colour gradient in there. So let's get this one mixed through, and unfortunately gradients do take a little bit of time to do, and you do need to keep your batter fluid and you do need to keep everything on an angle. So we're just going to pour this in. So you can see here I've actually got a definitive colour difference, but because they're kind of quite a harmonious colour scheme, I'm not really worried about it. We've got lots of stuff that's going to actually go through all of this gradient. So I don't need to worry too much about it being, for want of a better word, bitty or blocky. And I'm going to push through it. And a little bit later on, I do decide that I'm going to be a little bit less worried about the gradient colour and just kind of get some nice block colours in at the top when we do our wave on the top. So again, make sure you mix these through and make sure your batter is really, really workable. And it's one of those things, if ever I'm going to say to somebody, what's the one technique that you need to learn in soaping? It's going to be control of trace. Controlling your trace is one of the biggest skills you can ever learn, because it does allow you to work with your batter more. It allows you to introduce more colours. And there's one thing, and if you've watched a lot of YouTube channels, you will see a lot of people who will blend and blend and blend their batter and then all of a sudden go, oh, it's thickening up on me. Really? It's thickening up because you've stick blended it so much. It's thickening up on you because you've stick blended it so much. So if you can get it to an emulsion like this and wait for it to come to the thickness you want, you'll have a far better time of doing it, and you'll understand how much time you've got to work with it, which also then allows you to go, actually, I know if I stick blend this for another 2 or 3 seconds, it's going to push it along its trace a little bit quicker, and I can get to where I want to be a little bit quicker. But you're not sacrificing your design because everything is thickening up on you. And again, it's testing things like fragrance oils. If a fragrance oil is going to retard trace, stop trace, that's great. But you need to know what that's going to do to your actual batter and how you then deal with it. And on the flip side, if a batter is going to increase trace, it's going to speed trace up, you're going to want to work with that in something that you know how fast it's going to speed that trace up and what working time you've got with it. So these are really important. Now I'm using an aloe and cucumber fragrance oil with some green tea, and again, people say, well, that speeds up for me. I don't find it speeds up for me. I find it works absolutely fine in the quantities that I'm using it. I get a lovely smell from it. I'm not worried about that particular fragrance oil, but if I'm using something new, I'll be a little bit tentative about it. I'll see whether it's going to speed or retard trace up, and I work with that because it's important. But as you can see here, I've still got this beautifully, beautifully fluid trace. It's doing everything I need it to do. I'm able to pour that in, and again here, but in the last of that uncoloured batter, we'll stir it through, and we're creating an ombre in the last couple of bits of this pour. So I've gone from dark into light, into colour, into light. So again, you don't have to restrict yourself with either an ombre or either a gradient, you can actually do both at the same time, but you have to think about it in advance. How much batter do I need for my first pour? How much batter do I need as my intermediate colour? And again, you can do this with multiple colours, but you have to have them all poured out, and you have to have them in the right ratios in order to make it work. Now, this is critical here. Be very careful as you move this. You don't want to splash it around. You don't want to make this all kind of move around. And this is a beautiful shot here. You can actually see exactly where I've got that gradient and all of that coming from. And then when I'm adding this final little bit here, can you see how I'm pouring it on the same side? I'm not just willy-nilly pouring it. I'm pouring it in on the same side that I was pouring down. Even though the mould itself is vertical and upright, I'm still pouring it down that side. So we get to this point here and we've got our lovely sea all poured in. We're now going to muddy this all up. We're not actually, but we are going to now add our accent colours. And again, the accent colours are the yellow and the pink. And for the splash swirl, you're essentially going to produce a drop swirl into this batter that you've already poured, and then you're going to use a hanger tool to go through that and create the striations coming through it. In order to get a drop swirl, which is a technique in of itself, you're going to pour the batter of these colours into the soap. And again, it's important that you have a good trace for this, and with a drop swirl, the higher you pour from, the deeper the swirl will go down. And what we're trying to do is get this to go down into the soap and then manipulate it with our hanger tool. So you've seen my yellow go in there, and we're going to drop in our pink here, just trying to get it to go through, all the way through the soap from both sides. Now we are going to chop a little bit off of the edge of both of these, but again, we want this to go through. So I'm going to again line up, go nice and high, drop through, and get the soaps working really, really nicely. Now what I'm trying to do here is get a really nice kind of layering of all these colours, which is why I'm pouring in a number of pours. Now you can also do this by essentially dropping one colour in for the majority, then drop the other colour in, and then maybe put a little bit of the colour on the top to pull through with the hanger swirl. So you can see here how this is all kind of melding really nicely. And we've got most of our colour in there, and then we're going to lay the last little bit of colour in on the top. You can see I'm very, very close here, but I want that to kind of push through as I am then pushing my hanger swirl through. And I'm looking to make sure I'm getting all of that colour working, because the next stage of this soap itself is using the hanger swirl, so the hanger tool, and pushing that through. Now what I want to do is I want to go up and down in multiple passes. So I'm going to take the tool, I'm going to put it in at one edge, I'm going to go down as far as I can. Now bearing in mind I have got a layer at the bottom here, and I'm trying not to disturb that too much. So I'm going down, moving across, coming up, moving down, straight down, moving across a little bit, coming up again, moving across, and you repeat that. Now I probably could have done with doing this a few more times to get a few more striations. I'm always kind of guilty of underworking than overworking, so this time I went through once, I'm going through again, and I'm going to go through here and make all of these striations up and down, and then I'm going to go through once more and try a little bit more there, and probably should have gone through really nice and tightly on another pass after this one, just to kind of make sure that everything was going through. But by this point I'm thinking, crikey, I really need to stop here, and I probably could have carried on. Now once this is set up a little bit, I went back in with a little spatula here. Now the one thing I'd noticed in the tutorial, and this is part of the Soap Challenge Club, really wonderful if you can get involved in that one, it's a brilliant thing because you learn a lot of techniques from it. I'd noticed that by manipulating the soap a little bit, you could pull the soap to where you wanted it. Now I could have let this set up a little bit more, and probably should have done, but as you can see I'm pulling those colours across to create two little peaks. I'm going from the outside first and creating those peaks. Because it already set up in the middle a little bit more than the outside, you can see that the inside is a little bit more thick and manipulatable. if that's even a word, but we're going to go with it. And you can see it's a little bit thicker on the inside there. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to pull my batter and those striations into two little mounds where my jellyfish bodies are going to sit, and those then are going to create the tendrils. So we're basically creating the tendrils of our jellyfish here, and just pulling that soap and manipulating it so it's trying to kind of go up into our two jellyfish. And realistically, again, hindsight is a wonderful thing, I could have done that a lot more. So we're moving on to our jellyfish bodies here, and again they've got this yellow, so we've got our pink and yellow theme running through from our jellyfish, and that yellow on the outside creates this really wonderful halo around the actual kind of jellyfish body itself, and gives it a very distinct, almost kind of like glow. And that's what I was going for. Jellyfish have this kind of wonderful ethereal look to them, and I wanted to make sure we were representing that with these bodies. Now this mica is mucky, and you can see there that it's kind of just very, very clumped in and all on, but that's fine because that's what I wanted. And I know these are going to be very secure in the soap because they're going to be surrounded. So I'm just trying to take off some of the mica there just by rubbing it off, and you can see how mucky this is. We're just trying to rub off some of that, and I'm just trying to get it into those little areas on the underside so that everything is covered. So my little pink jellyfish have now become yellow jellyfish, but when we cut it through, that pink is going to shine through, and it's going to look absolutely wonderful at the end of it. Now I am going through and just making sure I'm taking out a relatively good amount of the mica from these spots, because I do need the soap to get up into there, and any mica that's in there could then just fall out and create a gap. So I am taking some time just to get that out. I'm going to wipe my hands down a little bit here whilst I bring in the mould from the top. And what I'm going to do is basically sit each one of these jellyfish on top of those little mounds I've made, and then give them a little push so that I'm pushing the soap up into those little crevices, and because they're quite small, it is going to work, and my batter is at just the right amount of viscosity to be able to go into those. Any thicker and I may have had a problem with that, but it seemed to work absolutely fine. Just giving them a little bit of motion and a little bit of movement, but then just giving that enough time to kind of settle up and settle into those areas and really just get it working. Now, the next stage of this is I wanted to create the shape of a wave, but this had to be done in one pour, and I couldn't add any embeds onto the top of the mould. So this is acetate. This is an acetate used for cake making, and it's a thin strip. It's about £5, and you get about 5 or 6 meters of the stuff. And what I want to do is I want to produce a tube with this. Now, why am I not just using a rolling pin or a tube or a piece? What I want to do is create that look of a wave crashing, but I also wanted to be able to get this mould out as a kind of very thin piece to keep the overhang of the soap on the top, but not disrupt it. But I also needed it to sit into the mould so that it kind of came from inside the mould and up and out. And having a solid piece in there was going to cause a lot of problems for me. So essentially, by creating this kind of temporary mould where I've got this taped piece of acetate, the soap isn't going to stick to it. It's going to allow me to take that piece of acetate off. And once I've cut it down to my kind of 6 inches using this this razor blade here, I can then roll this up, and I can create the size of kind of roll that I need in order for it to work. And then I can pop that into the mould. It's a little bit slippery. It's probably worth doing this without the gloves on, but I'm just trying to do it the best I can there. And then I'm using a little bit of a dowel just to roll inside so I can get that all nicely stuck down. And this is going to be basically my mould for the soap to come up and over the top and create that wave shape. And I'll bring my mould in here, and it's just going to pop into one or other of the sides, and it's just going to sit into the mould round about there. And we're going to then move on to our next little section here. So this is the last little pour. As you can see, this has been done in multiple pours, and I've had to do multiple things with it. And I'm adding some Arctic White from Resonate into here, quite a lot of it. Now what I find is Arctic White gives me a beautifully white colour, almost kind of iridescent, but it doesn't have the additional water issue that you get with titanium dioxide, and you don't get the speckling with it. I still use titanium dioxide, but if I'm going to use titanium dioxide, it's in a base, and I'm going to mix it through very, very, very well. In this one, I wanted that kind of iridescentness to the top of the soap, almost like waves sparkling in the sunshine, which this is going to give me to a certain extent, and it's also going to lighten this batter up. So again, I've moved the mould onto a slight turn here. We're going to do another, it's not necessarily a gradient, but we're certainly going to move through the colours, and we're also going to create this wave over the top. Now this bit did take quite some time because my batter moves quite slowly. I don't like to make it move too quickly, so this did take place over a number of hours. But what I've got here is I've just poured the last of my lye solution in, and again this is master batching, so my oil's been master batched, my lye has been master batched. It means I can work in relatively small quantities like this. So what you've got here is, you can see I'm just mixing up my green colour, and I'm going to actually just use this little pot with the green in it to pour some batter into, to get my kind of movement and going from the sea that was already in there around the jellyfish to the sea that's coming up over the top of them into this wave. So it's quite important that I used that green colour. And then here we've got the blue coming in, but you can see how I've got a definitive contrast, and I'm doing that very specifically. I'm not trying to make this a gradient, I'm stepping it through so it looks like the wave is changing colour from the green to the blue to a light blue into the white as it comes up and across this this temporary mould I've got in there to create that motion. So again, this is just the same process of pouring, putting it in, pouring, putting it in, and then I'm going to slowly raise it off of that little block of soap I've got there in order to get my kind of colour gradation. So you will see that this colour will be significantly different to the next one, which is significantly different to the blue one, and it will come through more in the final soap. So I'm going to lay quite a bit of that one into there. Then we're going to add more white. Let's get rid of a little bit more there. And then we'll add the last of our little bit of white to create the final layer. But we're just going to take it off this soap in a second, just to kind of move it down. Let's get a little bit more of that white into there. Mix that through. And again, we're not going for a nice smooth gradient here. I want that stepping into that last bit, so the kind of real crashing. It's a hardness of the waves coming across the top, which is why I'm choosing to do it that way. So let's get this all, and we really are right up to the top of the mold. Now this is a 15 centimeter by 6 centimeter by 11 centimeter mold. So I'm right up to the top of the 11 centimeters here, and it's going to go up and above the mold as well. So this is a really tall soap. We needed a tall and skinny, and this is certainly a tall and skinny. So all I'm doing is I'm using the lid of it to reduce it down a wee bit. I'm not trying to push it too much across. I just want to get that last little bit in, and then we'll move it down another section and we'll pull this little bit in. So it's realistically, I'm working to the very, very limits of this mold. And that's important because I wanted it to have this kind of this length and longevity to it. But because I'm putting so many elements into it, the bit that's the important part, which is the swirl, the splash swirl, which is what's being looked at, I still needed that to have enough space, but also to give the overall soap enough movement to make it read like it was the sea. Now what I'm finding here is that little bit of plastic is going to be a so and so, and it's going to start moving. So I'm going to insert this little bit of cane here, which is just going to keep it down into the soap whilst it saponifies, and then we can come back and just kind of bring that in and make it up and over the top. So we add our last little tiny bit of this blue soap in here, and when I say this mold is full, this mold is full. It is to the top. But I now have to wait, and I have to wait for my soap to do its thing, and I have to wait for my soap to get to the point where I can start to manipulate it and create the wave that's going to crash over the top of my soap. So the last little bit here, I think I've maybe got 3 at a very outside maximum millimeters, 3 millimeters of space left in this mold, and I'm going to push it right up to the top of that, and I'm actually going to rely on the meniscus of the soap. And for those of you that don't know what meniscus is, when you look at a glass of water, as it goes up at the edges, that's the meniscus. It's the little bit at the edge that goes up. Well, in soap, the meniscus actually kind of drops down because it's slightly thicker. It's got more of a thickness to it, and I'm relying on that surface tension of the soap to keep it in the mold, just the very edge. I mean, I used this mold to its maximum, to its absolute maximum, and I love these molds. They are fantastic. So again, I've done all of that here. I'm going to put a little bit of white across it and see what we get, and then we'll come back and see how we then get that soap to go up and over our wave. So here we're back, and I put a little bit of white in, and I've textured that, and I'm just going to play around with it and push a little bit of that colour up. It was still quite wet, but I needed to kind of try and get some of the colour to kind of seep over this mould for my wave. Now, we're about 45 minutes after I'd already poured everything, just so I'd got a little bit of support there, and things are still quite fluid. We are still quite fluid here. We've still got a lovely batter. And again, I'm soaping low temperature, and I'm soaping with a recipe I know gives me plenty of working time. And boy, did it give me some working time. So I poured a little bit of that over there, and you can see how that's just kind of settling into that crook. I wanted it realistically to settle in under this side, the bottom side of the mould, and get under there. And all of that other stuff I'm going to deal with at a later point, because it's again too thin, but I just needed to get that into there so it was going to secure itself onto the soap. I needed it to be nice and secure. So we've come back here, and this was this was actually 2 hours later. I had to go out. I came back in 2 hours, and I thought, right, we just have to give this a go. So our soap after 2 hours is still pretty workable, but it's like a stucco. It's like plaster, and I'm basically using that to build up and over my wave form in order to get that soap to create this wave shape. And again, the whole point is that I couldn't add anything after the soap had been saponified. It all had to be poured at the same time. You can see nothing has changed. It's still the same soap. It's still the same. Everything is the same. I'm still working with the same batch. But what I'm doing is I'm just allowing the soap to do its thing and using the properties inherent in the soap and the recipe that I have in order to get it to do the things I want it to do. So basically we're just using this kind of palette knife, and these palette knives are available from most art suppliers and on Amazon. You can pick them up, and this is just a very flat palette knife, but I kind of quite like it because it gives me a large surface area that I can work with. I can manipulate that soap really, really well. And I'm basically using that soap to create this form, this wave, and trying really hard not to overwork the soap and just let it kind of do its thing. Now, there is a dilemma I have when it comes to doing these soaps, because they've got so many colours that I want to pop, and I've also got white on the top that doesn't really like being C-popped. I did, however, C-pop this soap because my focus was on making sure that that pink and that yellow really, really popped. And I'm just using the back of a spoon here to give myself these kind of striations and waves right on the top of the soap. I wanted to have this kind of real rustic, like roughness with this kind of these tentacles sitting underneath the main soap itself, and I played around with it for a little while. Now, unfortunately, when I went to record the cut of the soap, I forgot to press record. It's completely my fault, and I do apologise. So you are not going to be able to see the cutting of the soap, but I do, however, have a really nice revolve of the 6 soaps I got out of this. Now, I cut them a bit thinner because they are much, much taller than a normal soap. So you're still getting the same weight of soap. It's just proportioned a little differently in a tall and skinny mould. The one thing I will say is taking that plastic out was so easy because basically slit it open and see how that wave comes up and across. And we've got that beautiful wave happening on the top. We've got our jellyfish with all of their tendrils kind of spilling out underneath. So this soap took quite a while to do, and it was done in what, 1, 2, 3 pours. You've got the embeds that took a little bit of time, and then we did the manipulation on the top of the mold there in a tall and skinny bar. I'm really pleased with these ones. I think they've come out beautifully. And if you've enjoyed this video, please let me know and leave a comment down below. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. It really helps me grow and allows me to make more videos and tutorials for all of you. When you subscribe, don't forget to click the bell icon if you'd like to get notified when a new video is uploaded. And thanks a lot, Soapsters. I'll see you again next time.